stories, big guests, the big picture. Afternoons with Rob Breckenridge. Weekdays 12:30 to 3, 770 CHQR.
All right, welcome back. Rob Breckenridge with you on this Wednesday afternoon. We'll have some more time for your phone calls in our time remaining here. Talk a bit about tonight's leaders debate. The first of two official debates goes tonight, French language tonight, English tomorrow. So talk a bit more about the campaign. Got a few other things to get to as well. Want to turn our attention to our next guest, who is out with his first novel in, I guess, about 4 years. Linda McIntyre is the winner of the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the author of several best-selling books, both fiction and nonfiction. Of course, spent many decades as an investigative journalist. His latest book is called The Winter Wives. He's also going to be part of a WordFest event coming up this fall, part of their 26 at 26 series, wordfest.com. More details there. Lyndon McIntyre joins us on the line here this afternoon. Lyndon, congrats on the new book, and thanks so much for making some time for us here this afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be here.
I'm curious, too, because I would think that maybe the past year and a half has been a prolific time for writers, but I don't know, maybe I'm misreading that. Did you have a lot of time through this pandemic to churn out a new novel here?
Well, I did a lot of, the novel was kind of done before the pandemic, but the pandemic gave me a lot of time to rewrite and to reconsider stuff, and so it was quite useful in that regard. I've also been working on a nonfiction book, so the pandemic has not been very helpful there because nonfiction requires travel, it requires access to archives and libraries and people. And for the last year and a half almost, I've been kind of like paralyzed. I mean, getting work done and many, reading books and online access, but it's not the same thing as sort of going to the scene of what you want to write about.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing I would imagine. And I've spoken to you before about that transition. I mean, writing nonfiction is almost a long form of journalism. It seems like a natural progression, but, the fiction, the novel, that storytelling requires a different kind of pivot. And clearly a role you've just leapt right into.
Well, it depends. I guess a lot has to do with your attitude. My attitude is that it's all just basically telling stories. Yeah. In some stories, you have to restrain your imagination because people expect you to be as factual as is possible and to be limited in the input of your own opinions about stuff. So that's called journalism. Nonfiction, book writing, you're allowed to indulge in some creativity in creating scenes and explaining character, but basically it is supposed to be as close as possible to a fact-driven process. I always think of fiction as also being fact-driven in the sense that the fiction I like to think about and write and read has its roots in reality. Yeah. And that sometimes I find in writing fiction, you can take a straight line to what you consider to be true without having to go through an awful lot of the formalities of nonfiction or journalism. So that, in a way, fiction is a medium for truth-telling, as is all kinds of storytelling.
Yeah, and I get the sense it's a way of exploring topics that interest you or fascinate you, and you can really explore those in different directions. This latest novel weaves together a lot of different issues. I mean, there's themes of crime here, relationships, but also specifically dementia. The question of dementia and the impact that has, which, as I understand, is something in particular that really fascinated you.
Well, I've always been fascinated in the notion of how well we know people, how well we know ourselves. What dementia does is it creates a fast process of disintegration in which personalities are exposed in ways that probably, given different circumstances, the individual would probably prefer not to go through. We learn a lot about people through illness. We are challenged by what we learn through illness. We're challenged by, kind and gentle people become cranky and sometimes abusive. Abusive and taciturn people sometimes become extremely warm and funny. We get to know people in a whole different context. And when you step back from that, it's kind of true for all relationships. As we grow older, as we experience more of life, we change. The people that we know really well and care about, they change too. And sometimes the changes aren't always welcomed. Sometimes we get unpleasant surprises. So our relationships are constantly being tested by just the flow of time and experience. And that's what's happening in this book. You have four very close people who got together as adolescents, thought they knew each other like so well that they couldn't know any more. But they find out that as time goes by, a great deal changes, and that they never really are ever going to know the other person as well as they want to or they think they have. So, again, it's a matter of relationships being tested, demands being unexpected, sometimes unwelcome demands being placed on relationships, which is the sort of central reality of dealing with someone, helping someone who was suffering from dementia.
And was that the spark for this book? And do, these projects often start with that kind of a spark, something that you're curious about, and start asking those questions, well, what if, or what would this be like? And is that sort of the snowball that leads to, well, like this?
I think so. My first focused thought about this next story I wanted to tell had to do with the effect on a person's self-knowledge of discovery that he has a very serious illness that will alter everything about him and alter everything that he perceives. And that's one of my central characters. He believes he's entering early onset dementia. He finds out that's a mistake. And in the gap between the false diagnosis and the reality that he doesn't have it, he has to really figure out who he is and what drives him, why he does awful things sometimes, why he thinks the way he thinks. Because he can no longer, initially he's able to say, well, okay, dementia, mental illness explains everything that I have sort of a hard time accepting about myself. Well, no, you got to go someplace else to find out what really drives you and what really causes what you don't like about yourself. Yeah. I sort of wrestled with that idea, and it gradually started to take on the shape of a story involving real people.
It's interesting, too, the background, right, the settings for these stories, and part of this story involves Nova Scotia. And obviously Nova Scotia is near and dear to your heart. You grew up there, spent much of your life there. It's important to, tap into what you know. How important is that background, that setting, and really establishing the lives of these characters?
Well, I consider, I guess it's a Canadian thing, perhaps. I consider that the place, location, is a living, breathing character in every story because it has a profound effect on the people that are actually at the center of the story. It's the story of, I grew up in the Atlantic region. I grew up in Cape Breton, and I consider myself, I'm not a kind of a chauvinistic Atlantic Canadian or a Cape Bretoner, but I have to recognize the fact that who and what I am has an awful lot to do with the landscape that produced me, has a lot to do with the landscape that affected all the people from whom I come and all the people that I spent my early life among. It's a place I've never lost touch with. I know the geography, I know the culture, I know the history, I know the rhythms of the place. So if you want to have a character that you can present in a story with some sense of confidence, I think that you go to where you connect best. And I think most Canadians will find a place, whether it's Alberta or BC, Northern Ontario, Quebec, a place that you do connect to in a very strong way and to which you have to attribute an awful lot of who you are. Mm-hmm. And so it's quite a natural thing for me to write from the perspective of someone from down in the Atlantic region, from a community in the Atlantic region where I can sort of take certain things for granted in my knowledge of how those communities function and the dynamics and the personalities. Yeah.
Well, and, you mentioned you're working on some nonfiction, and I suppose you can tell us as much as you want to tell us about that project. But, I say all of that to ask you this question because I read that this is likely then your last actual novel. Is that the case?
Well, if you Google me, there's a sort of a glaring reason why that could be. I mean, every novel I've ever started, I said, God, spare me to finish this. And when I did finish it, I said, please, God, don't let me start another one. It's a hard process. Fiction writing is difficult. It requires you to travel in of yourself. You would probably rather be locked away. And anyway, I'm getting old, and I'm starting to get tired of the travel within myself. I'm not tired of traveling. I'm not tired. I'm kind of sick of my own navel-gazing, which is what happens when you get lost in a novel. Yeah. And so I don't have anything else fictional buzzing in the back of my head. I'm being engrossed in a nonfiction project that has its roots in Ireland in the early part of the 1900s, and sort of sprawls over into North America and Eastern Canada, and it's sort of caused me or required me to dust off the old toolbox of journalism and get into deep research, get into like following my nose through places, dark and interesting places, and without really knowing what the destination is going to yield. And I realized how much I enjoyed doing that when I did it for 50 years, Rob, 50,
yeah.
FIDE0. Yeah. And it was an educational and really important chapter of my life. And so it feels good to be back in that nonfiction realm because it reminds me of, what I was good at in some respects and reminds me of the discipline that's required to tell a story that's fact-based and the work you have to do to dig out facts when they have, for various reasons, been obscured or lost. So if it's the last novel, I'm perfectly happy. I've written 6 novels that I'm pleased with. Mm-hmm. One of them was a big success. I've always said that you can write a good novel, that's your job. You write a good novel, but you can't write a successful novel. A successful novel success comes from a whole bunch of factors over which the writer has no control. Right. And so you write a novel as well as you can, you send it out there. It's like raising a kid. You do your best while you got control of the kid, then you send the kid out into the world. And the kid is on his own. And you just have to keep your mouth shut, just let the kid do the best he can. And that's the way with the novel. And it's a heart-wrenching process sometimes, as it is when you send a kid out in the world and the kid does badly, makes mistakes. Right. You discover things wrong with the kid that are your fault. These are bad moments. So I'm going to try and stick with the facts for the rest of the journey.
Makes sense. Well, this one is called The Winter Wives. The novel is out now. As mentioned, the event coming up this fall in November. Details at wordfest.com. Lyndon McIntyre, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for making some time for us here today.
Thank you, Rob. Always great talking to you.
Likewise. Take care. There you go. One and only Lyndon McIntyre, veteran journalist, many years in the trenches in that sense, and told us some very important stories over the years and has shifted to a different form of storytelling. 6 novels now. One of them, of course, won the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Working on some nonfiction as well. His latest work, The Winter Wives. It's available now. All right, we'll take another time out here. We'll come back. We'll get some time for your phone calls. You can reach us in Calgary, 403-974-8255. In Edmonton, 780-496-0063. My name is Rob Breckenridge. More after this.
Afternoons with Rob Breckenridge, starting at 12:30 on News Talk 770 Calgary.